Hi. Okay, in this video I'm going to tell you that the UN needs you. It needs to know what your understanding of the abuse that we all know as parental alienation. Is it an abusive concept used to threaten and coercively control you by the suggestion of a partner leaving you and taking your children with them? Now, I've been there, and that is not nice at all. I went to work and I had no idea whether my daughter would still be at home when I got home from work. It was awful. Or is parental alienation real? Have you experienced the agony of being rejected and cut off by a much-loved child by coercive control of another manipulating them to reject you? Now, that actually happened to me 10 years after all the threats, and believe me, it is emotionally crippling. But there's also a third option. Were you a child who has grown up believing that a parent was either a bad mum or an abusive dad, even though you've got no real recollection that that was actually the case, and decades later you've discovered it was a lie, when your precious childhood is now a distant memory and all the ghosts of anxiety and mistrust have taken up residency in your mind, and now they refuse to let go? If any of these scenarios ring true for you, you need to respond by December the 15th to the UN. The link is in the description below. And as a mother of 5 sons, yes, 5, 4 of them, I must add, are stepsons, when I see calls for input like this, my heart is so pained. Do you know what? Men are parents too, yet their duty as parents seems to be totally and utterly overlooked. By missing men out altogether, this call for input implies that men don't experience violence in custody cases, yet women and children do. Now, clearly, that is not true. Now, I know the Special Rapporteur's responsibility is to women and to girls. But let's make no mistake, parental alienation is a family issue, not an isolated issue that only affects girls and women. Is there an agenda to write fathers out of children's lives altogether since they've been written out of the headline? Now, that sounds like a conspiracy theory, and I am not into conspiracy theories, and yet when I meet dads, I know they would say this rings true for them. Now, if you're short of time, go to the end. I'll put a link or a bookmark where you can go straight to the point where I go over each of the points that the Special Rapporteur wants you to answer. Please write from your heart so you are heard. Your comments profoundly affected me when Recover Our Kids asked for input for the Domestic Abuse Act. The Special Rapporteur, Reem Asaleem, needs to know your stories too, and hopefully she will be as profoundly moved as I was. Back to her input. So, what is the purpose of trying to get input on parental alienation? Well, she says it is to inform the Special Rapporteur on violence against women and girls in a report on the nexus between custody and guardianship cases, violence against women and violence against children, with a focus on the abuse of the concept of parental alienation and related or similar concepts. Now, I'll repeat, with a focus on the abuse of the concept of parental alienation and related concepts. Now, immediately, I'm realising that the Special Rapporteur has made up her mind about parental alienation and deems it an abusive concept. But just in case I was making this up, she later goes on to spell it out. She says, in several countries, family courts tend to judge allegations as deliberate efforts by mothers to manipulate their child and pull them away from their father. This supposed effort by parents alleging abuse is often termed parental alienation. The term generally refers to a presumption that the child's fear or rejection of one parent, typically the non-custodial parent, stems from the malevolent influence of the preferred, typically custodial parent. Supposed effort. But what if this is true? What if the custodial parent really is manipulating a child to reject a parent? Isn't that abuse too? What if the non-custodial parent is actually a safe parent? Shouldn't that child have the right to family life with both parents? Now listen to this description of parental alienation. Before a court, Dr. Stanbrook was asked to offer his definition of parental alienation, and he provided the following response. It is a descriptive term that refers to a process. It is not a diagnostic label. It doesn't appear in any nomenclature about mental health disorders. It is a descriptive term that refers to a process where there is a systemic devaluation, minimisation, discreditation of the role of, typically, the other parent in a parental dyad. One parent systematically, through a variety of physical, emotional, verbal, contextual, relational set of manoeuvres, systematically reduces the value, love, commitment, relationship, involvement of the other parent by minimising, criticising, devaluing that parent's role. It can involve children having their sense of history being rewritten by a parent's redefinition of history, by reframing things, repetitively talking about things. It can involve sometimes very subtle and sometimes not so subtle persuasion, coercion, direction, misrepresentation, and so on. It is an abusive practice. It is child abuse when it occurs. It's emotionally abusive. It cripples and stunts children's development because the reality they knew at one point is undermined by this process. It is dangerous for the development because, in an ideal situation, children should feel free to love and interact with the adults who are important in their lives, unencumbered by twisted turns of relational loyalties that are unfortunately misplaced in this situation. Parental alienation is a process, an interactional process, where systematically one parent's role for the children is eroded over the course of time. So let's have a look at the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child. Article 5. Governments must respect the rights and responsibilities of parents and carers to provide guidance and direction to their children as they grow up. But if a parent is written out of a child's life, they can't do this. Article 7. Every child has the right to know and be cared for by their parents. But if a parent is written out of a child's life, how can they know that parent and be cared for them by them? Article 8. Every child has the right to an identity. Governments must respect and protect family relationships from being changed unlawfully. I guess here the term unlawfully could be disputed. How about unjustly changed so as to destroy a family relationship? Article 9. Separation from parents. Children must not be separated from their parents against their will unless it is in their best interests. For example, if a parent is hurting or neglecting a child. Children whose parents have separated have the right to stay in contact with both parents unless this could cause them harm. Article 10. Family reunification. If a child's parents live apart in different countries, the child has the right to visit and keep in contact with both of them. Surely, these last two articles in the Children's Charter mean that governments should be facilitating contact, not destroying it. Article 18, parental responsibilities and state assistance. Both parents share responsibility for bringing up their child and should always consider what is best for the child. Governments must support parents by creating support services for children and giving parents the help they need to raise their children. Madam Special Rapporteur, this includes dads and mums like me. Article 19, protection from violence, abuse and neglect. Governments must do all they can to ensure that children are protected from all forms of violence, abuse, neglect and bad treatment by their parents or anyone else who looks after them. Make no mistake, children have the right to be brought up by their parents where it is safe to do so. And governments should be doing everything in their power to ensure this happens. Back to the Special Rapporteur's call for input. Although these concepts lack universal clinical or scientific definition, emerging patterns across various jurisdictions of the world indicate courts worldwide are using the concept of parental alienation or similar concepts explicitly or allowing for its instrumentalisation. The vast majority of those accused of alienating their child while alleging abuse are women. Hang on, you're still talking about being accused of parental alienation. What about those children who are alienated? We're not talking allegations now. We're talking severed attachments to safe, loving parents, because one parent puts their own insecurities and needs before their children's. Back to the report. Consequently, many women victims of violence and abuse face double victimisation as they are punished for alleging abuse, including losing custody or, at times, being in prison. I agree, losing custody or imprisonment, unless their crimes are so despicable, is never ever appropriate. For many parents, the beginning of alienation begins because they are overprotective. They and their children need support to find a healthy resolution and not to become embroiled in the actions that promote them as perpetrators of abuse. But here in the West, far too quickly, parents are propelled into litigation before any other form of support is put in place. I'm regularly hearing heartbreaking accounts of parents who never wanted to go to court but had no other way to protect their children. Seriously, what alternative course of action can these parents take? Children who are victims of violence and abuse by a parent, in many cases a father, often continue to be subjected to such violence and abuse against themselves and or the other parent, in most cases the mother, post-separation, through imposed contact with the abusive parent. Why are you making this gendered? Mothers and fathers can both be victims of this abuse or perpetrators of this abuse. These dynamics often allow parents to be intimidated, coerced or forced by their abusive ex-partners and pressured by the courts to withdraw their allegations of abuse or to agree to specific custody arrangements. When given the risk of losing contact with their children and the violence committed by their partner, women end up withdrawing their allegations or not reporting it at all. I'm not saying that this doesn't happen, but it personally does not ring true with my own experience. Firstly, the evidence of abuse, which there was loads, was dismissed as historic by the court, and I was never ever pressured to withdraw it because I couldn't even present it to begin with. But more worryingly, are the accounts of custody arrangements not being honoured by one parent. The orders are ignored, and then there is no consequence whatsoever when these orders are broken. This is unfortunately far too common globally, and I would argue it is far more common than the situation that the Special Rapporteur is suggesting. She goes on, according to experts. Could you name me as experts, please? I'm assuming you mean Professor Joan Meyer, since this is where I was first introduced to you, Reem. In many cases, the perpetrators of violence have deliberately inflicted violence on their children as a continuation of the violence inflicted on their partner, who is the parent of their children, and therefore a continuation of the attempt and process of controlling the target, i.e. the mother. Or the father. I'm just saying this abuse is not gendered. This is often justified with references to the best interest of the child. Now that term, I'm really familiar with that term. And it's one that should be at the heart of every single policy. So that it is argued the child's best interest is to maintain contact with their father under all circumstances, even if the father has been abusive towards the mother or the child. Pardon? That is such a loaded statement. First, an abusive husband does not necessarily equate to an abusive father, but evidence of abuse should be looked into. Similarly, an abusive wife does not necessarily equate to an abusive mother, but again, any evidence of abuse must be considered when making child arrangement orders or custody orders. Right? I think that's quite simple. Secondly, the best interests of the child should never mean that contact should be maintained under all circumstances with a known abuser. Facilitated, sure, in a safe way that is acceptable to all parties, but not under any circumstances. Come on, let's have some common sense here. Thirdly, this statement contradicts Article 19. She must have considered Article 19 because she then addresses it by saying, furthermore, Article 19 of the Convention of the Rights of the Child provides that the rights for the child should be protected from all forms of physical or mental violence, injury, abuse or maltreatment, including sexual abuse while in the care of parents. So, just for clarification, this article includes coercive control by parents to manipulate a child to reject a safe, loving parent. Surely, that abuse must be included in there. She goes on, where it occurs, the failure to address intimate partner violence and violence against children in custody rights and visitation decisions is a form of violence against women. No, it is a form of violence against the family. So that includes dads and their children, and a violation of the human rights to life and security that could amount to torture. It also violates the best interests of the child legal standard. Now this is huge, but it should not be a gendered statement. Families are precious and are all made up of all generations of male and female. The best interests of the child legal standard states, put simply, the best interests of the child are whatever is best for that individual child. The UN Convention of the Rights of the Child expressly recognises the role of parents and carers, including extended family, guardians and others with legal responsibility, in protecting and promoting the best interests of the child. However, since then, the CEDAW Committee has issued a number of concluding observations in which it's directed state parties to abolish the use of the concept of parental alienation in court cases. Seriously. Abolishing parental alienation and the concept, what would that actually achieve? carte blanche for abusers to carry on abusing. It then describes cases of abusive fathers taking lives of their own children. Yet, there is no similar case study of mothers taking the lives of their own children, of which in the UK there have been a number of infamous cases like Victoria Colombo, Baby P, and more recently Arthur, Star and Logan. Seriously, mothers can be as abusive as fathers, and I hate saying that, but that is the truth. Despite a strong indication that parental alienation concept has become a tool for denial of domestic and child abuse, leading to further discrimination and harm to women and children, data on the treatment of the history of intimate partner violence and other forms of domestic violence and abuse when family courts assess custody cases continues to be limited. No, it is not limited. Since 2016, there have been over 1,000 different academic papers published that records the severity of this abuse to victim parents and, most importantly, to their children. The problem is that the data that is required is not routinely logged because, wait for it, parental alienation is not considered a concept, according to CEDAW, that should be admissible in court. Why? Why, surely the truth of the data would shine a much-needed light on the truth of this abuse globally. Goes on to say, given the correlation between the resort to the concept of parental alienation and the persistence of gender-based violence against women, the topic requires urgent attention. Evidence, please. If there is a correlation, back it up with the data. But I agree, this issue does require urgent attention, but not necessarily as you are implying. A holistic. If it's holistic, it must consider the whole family. How can we protect precious, safe attachments to parents in the wake of separation or any other family trauma? A holistic and coordinated approach based on the existing international and regional standards is required in such cases at national level, not only to uphold the principle of the best interest of the child, but also the principle of non-discrimination against women and equality between women and men. Now, I agree with this statement. Equality or parity between men and women is all that the UN Charter stands for. Article 7 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states, all are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. All are entitled to equal protection against any discrimination in violation of this declaration and against any incitement to such discrimination. Article 16.3. The family is the natural and fundamental group unit of society and is entitled to protection by society and the state. So, the objectives of your input. Grave consequences on mothers and their children. Please, let's get this right. Parental alienation has grave consequences for families globally. To sum up, the Special Rapporteur wants your input on the following areas. Point 1. I would argue that here you should describe how the abuse you experienced affected your relationship with your children or with your parent. Dads, this includes you. If you need a prompt, consider the perpetrator behaviours in the statutory guidance to the 2021 Domestic Abuse Act here in the UK. 2. This would be an impact statement of how this abuse has affected you, and that includes you, dads. Have you been prescribed antidepressants or sought therapy? Was your career affected? Suicide ideation or self-harm, the list goes on. We need to show that the consequences of this abuse are real and not alleged. 3. Were there any other issues that were unique to your situation that contributed to the abuse you suffered? Remember, the family is that vital unit for all civilization, religions and cultures. 4. Were you subject to systemic abuse because those frontline agencies that should have supported you had no understanding of the dynamics of this abuse and were unable to identify the red flags of parental alienation? Note well, regulation without training is totally and utterly futile. 5. Please don't be put off by the mention of mother and child. Dads, you have rights too. And if you are a safe, loving parent, you should be part of your child's life just like any other safe family member, including grandparents. 6. This one is probably for the legal courts, etc. to answer. All I would add is please don't limit your data just to mums. Please ensure that the data gives the full picture, because this is the only way we are going to be able to truly stop this heinous abuse that destroys lives. 7. If you are a parent who has experienced good practice to report, please do. For me personally, I can't actually fault the CAS workers that were actually involved in my case. They undoubtedly had my child's best interests at heart. But I knew that they understood the dynamics of parental alienation, and for that I am truly grateful. 8. I listened to trained court experts, and they all say that getting a full history of everyone involved is key to understanding the dynamics and getting the support right. I know in my case, had I been able to share my ex's abuse and his history, it would have changed the outcome. Let's look at good science. The good science of attachment and the epigenetic considerations of how this trauma affects our physiology. 9. I think this is the any other business agenda item on the bottom of the minutes. But one last thought. Aren't our families worth fighting for? Wouldn't it be cheaper and more beneficial to society to support and encourage the founding block of all civilization? We've got to accept divorces here, and it's never easy, but it needn't be the stumbling block that causes us to descend into a chaotic existence. Family life is worth fighting for, isn't it? Of course it is. So please, please, please complete the input and return it to Reem Asaleem as soon as you can. By reporting, we will let them know what our truth is, and hopefully we can shine a light on this abuse and change things for the better. And I won't stop talking, and the truth will prevail. Stay strong. We're going to keep fighting until there is change. Thank you.